those sustainable development goals that we hear a lot, and the concept of sustainable development means that there's a big tie between climate change and those other ones like women's rights and women's empowerment. And we have two wonderful speakers, Vanessa Lantain and Oyeyinka Oyelowo from the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, that are going to tell you about this. So first we'll have Vanessa, who's worked in a variety of nonprofits after completing her studies at the University of Victoria in political science. She was in Tanzania, where she worked at a children's rights organization whose main areas were to improve gender equality by preventing child marriage, unwanted teenage pregnancy, and female genital mutilation. In Ghana, she trained over 1,000 youth in employment and entrepreneurship programs and helped roll out the first innovation fund, which was then replicated in 5 other countries to give entrepreneurs seed capital. In Canada, she has worked and volunteered with multiple organizations in the environmental, political, and youth education field. Vanessa, thank you for being with us today.
My name is Vanessa Lantain, and I'm the National Coordinator for the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. I'm also with a member of the National Board, Oyeyinka Oyelowo, who will speak after me on the same topic, the impacts of climate change on women's empowerment and the education of girls. So with my short time, I will talk about the challenges I saw as a Canadian and working in Tanzania at the Children's Dignity Forum, whose main goals are to prevent teenage pregnancy and early and forced child marriage, and female genital cutting and mutilation. So there is a direct link between the health of the environment and women's empowerment, and this is not groundbreaking news. Wangari Maathai, the founder of the Green Belt movement and Nobel Peace Prize winner, knew this before I was even born and mobilized over 900,000 women to plant 30 million trees. She said, poor people will cut the last tree to cook the last meal, and that the more you degrade the environment, the more you dig deeper into poverty. And when we degrade our air with carbon emissions, the pollution is not localized, it affects everyone. Wangari Maathai knew the importance of nature as a buffer from extreme poverty. The less money and nature a family has, the less likely a girl is going to go to school, which is proven to be critical to female empowerment. Education has a direct causal link between how many children a woman will have, improves child spacing, and better community health indicators overall. So at the Children's Dignity Forum, we focused on girls' empowerment in a rural setting. So let's imagine ourselves in Tanzania. In East Africa, around 2/3 of us are employed in agriculture, and around 75% of those farmers are female. With these two statistics, you can already see the link between the health of the environment and women's empowerment. So while I was there in 2016, they had a terrible drought with rolling electricity blackouts because power came from hydroelectric dams. Rain is not only falling less, but it is more unpredictable, which increases the workload on women and girls who are usually responsible for water and will have to walk farther for it to complete household chores like cooking and washing, only adding to their time and energy poverty. Climate change will affect their ability to go to school, become financially independent, and have the power of making choices over their lives, especially with regards to sexual reproductive health rights. So there are hard choices for Tanzanian families. If you are a farmer and there has been little rain, the rivers and soil have dried out, and there's not a produce surplus, ultimately no money will be raised. Girls will be taken out of school because it is just too expensive, and the family requires more labor input to improve crop yields. Families must find other scarce sources of income. So males are expected to be the breadwinners, and their education is prioritized to attract a wife who will then live with him or the family. Unfortunately, it is not economically advantageous to invest money into a girl's education because she leaves to live with her husband's family and become part of their lineage. So there is an economic incentive to marry girl children, which is called bride price, which this includes valuables that the bride's family can eat, use, or sell. And if a family is struggling with extreme poverty, parents may marry their children early for survival. Before marriage, some parents of all religious beliefs, including Muslim, Christian, and Jewish, will have the genitalia of their girl children cut to preserve their purity and as a rite of passage to become a woman, sometimes as early as 12 years old. So often done at a time called the cutting season by a designated cutter. In Swahili, she is called the ngariba. A paradox of this work is that our main objective is empowering women and girls, but to do this, it is taking away a well-paying female job. So it is so important for a girl to finish her education, but the perception is that if you are a mother, pregnant, or married, you should not be in school. So as you can see with those statistics, that narrows the opportunity for the education of so many girls, which will only get worse with climate change. So climate change will push more families into extreme poverty and result in the sacrifice of girl children's education, rights, and freedoms by having them cut, forced to marry or marry early, resulting in teenage pregnancy and continuing the poverty cycle. So despite these challenges, I really want to highlight the resilience and strength of women and girls and the love I witnessed within Tanzanian families and communities, but also how important it is to control our own pollution and support climate change mitigation and investment in Africa for sustainable jobs and energy, and how closely it is connected to women's empowerment and the education of girls. So thank you so much, everyone. And I will now hand it over to my wonderful board member, Yinka, to talk more about solutions.
My name is Oyeyinka Oyelowo, and I am a national board member for the Voice of Women for Peace. And I'm also a human rights lawyer practicing at Franklin Law in Toronto, Ontario. My presentation focuses on the research-based solutions that we can create by educating African women and communities about how to manage the devastating effects of climate change. First, I will examine qualitative and quantitative research highlighting the negative macroeconomic impacts of climate change and the consequent burden on public education, peace, and security. Agriculture in developing countries across Africa and the Middle East suffer immensely from increases in temperature. For example, Africa's slow economic growth in the 1980s and in the 1990s has been linked to historically low precipitation. Communities that rely on agriculture as their main source of livelihood are vulnerable to poverty and famine. And one recent example that has shocked the world are the massive swarms of locusts and severe floods threatening East Africa's food supply. Academic research shows that by the year 2050, African countries will sustain a permanent temperature increase of approximately 2 degrees Celsius to 5 degrees Celsius. We need to translate this research into action because the World Health Organization has highlighted that educating women is a lifeline to development and sustainable development. For example, educating African women about what crops survive in specific temperatures will have a direct impact on access to food, health, safety, and mortality rates in relation to poverty. The current global response to the threat of climate change is insufficient because there is no clear plan as to how green climate action funds will directly impact communities in Africa. A Harvard University research paper called Temperature Test Scores in Human Capital Production indicates that heat exposure affects educational performance in both the short and long run. So taking an exam on a 90-degree Fahrenheit day relative to a 72-degree Fahrenheit day results in a reduction in exam performance. It also results in a reduction in human capital production in terms of agriculture. Peace and security is also threatened by temperature increases, which directly affect the lives of women. Studies have shown that an increase in violence correlates with higher temperatures. For example, in Tanzania, a study from 2005 showed that temperature increases resulted in an increase in witch murders, which is specifically violence against women. So gender inequalities are actually exacerbated by violence correlated with the negative consequences of climate change. At the village level, there are higher instances of violence against women due to poverty and lack of access to food and income. At the regional level, a 1990 study shows that the higher temperatures resulted in more riots and battles across East Africa. And at the country level, higher temperatures have resulted in increased civil war risk across sub-Saharan Africa. In order to build resilient African communities that can stand the negative impacts of climate change, the key path for improved climate action is to educate women about how to deal with climate changes resulting in loss of food, security, and educational opportunities. When we invest in women's education about climate change, we invest in the health and safety of African communities. So how do we build a sustainable and resilient African community focused on education, health, and the well-being of all Africans amidst rapid climate change. The key pathways for improved climate change adaptation in Africa include investing in affordable and effective interventions to reduce the burden of mortality and disability. So like I've mentioned before, educating women on which crops can withstand the changes in temperature. Our goal is to reduce the burden of mortality and disability by empowering women with access to information. Empowering women through education is a powerful way to combat climate change. Thank you.